What's going on, guys? I'm sure you've heard by now that Joe Biden has come out and made remarks regarding the Texas mass shooting that happened yesterday. I kind of wanted to make a fun video the next time around after that last one I put out. I wanted to make something a little lighter spirited and just, some of the ways I deal with all this chaos that's going on and how I'm able to keep my mind sane in this insane world we're living in. But yeah, I was just checking out my pocket constitution here, and I didn't see anything in the Second Amendment about it not being absolute. In fact, let me read this for you right quick in case you haven't heard it in a while. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In fact, shall not be infringed sounds pretty absolute to me and most of the people that I know. So we're going to debunk a lot of the stuff that Joe Biden had to say regarding this Texas mass shooting, and my condolences for all the people and families involved and first responders and all that stuff that had to go onto the scene and see that horrific scene. The worst, that's the worst thing that any officer or any first responder or any parent would ever have to get to hear in their whole life. And that's a life-changing event, and my condolences. I can't even convey how badly I feel for you and the losses that you're going through right now and the struggles you're going through. But for Joe Biden to come out immediately swinging at the Second Amendment, I mean, for one, we all knew it was going to happen. We were all kind of waiting for it to happen. But for this idiot to come out and say the things that he said, the Second Amendment, this is a quote from Joe Biden, the Second Amendment is not absolute, he said. So I just read you what the Second Amendment says in the Bill of Rights right here. I hope you have a pocket constitution that you literally carry with you. You can see mine is pretty worn. I carry it with me almost all of the time. The only time I don't carry it with me is if I'm going over to my farm and I know that I'm not going to be dealing with any people over there. I don't feel like I need it there. But anywhere else, if I'm going into the city or I'm going around any other people, I carry my pocket constitution with me. Rarely ever need it, but you never know when you need to know your rights and you can't quite remember exactly what that Fourth or Fifth Amendment said, or First or Second or whatever the case may be. But it is absolute. Shall not be infringed is an absolute statement. So we got a real problem here in this country. We've got some people that are trying to blame the gun, the device. You know, I was thinking before I started the camera here, it would be like somebody taking a knife like this. You know, yeah, it's scary looking. It's a Chinese-made kukri, a copy of a kukri. I've got a real one in the house, but this is the one I use around the shop and when I'm wanting to hack up some limbs or something that don't really, I don't want to tear up my good one, so I use this old one. And it actually works pretty well. But it'd be like me handing this to someone, and then suddenly they just went on a rampage and a killing spree and started just killing everybody around them, right? I mean, would we blame the knife, or would we blame the rightful party, the person that committed the atrocity? That is the issue here. These Democrats are never going to solve any problems because they're too busy blaming the inanimate object. A gun has no capabilities or capacity of, thinking on its own. It can only be, it's only got a trigger. That's all it's got. So it doesn't matter how many rounds are in the magazines. In fact, I didn't see anything in the Second Amendment that said I couldn't own a cannon, or I couldn't have high capacity magazines, or I couldn't have an AR-15 or assault weapon, as they like to call it, assault rifle, as they like to call it. Unfreaking believable. It's not the knife, it's not the gun, it's not the inanimate object, it's the crazy ass psychopath that is off his meds or whatever the deal is. I bet you money as time goes on, we're going to figure out that this guy was on psychotropic drugs, or he had other mental issues and signs that were leading up to this. So what is the problem here in the United States? It's not too much freedom and too many rights and, granted by the Bill of Rights. It's not that at all. It's the fact that we have a mental illness problem here in this country. Big time. And one of my commenters on the last video, he's actually out in the Seattle area, and I can't recall his name, Robert something, I can't recall his whole name, but It was a great comment. He wrote in his comment that basically he's stuck and he couldn't get out of Seattle because he has, like, he didn't really say and go into specifics, but I'm assuming he has family obligations, probably, you know, relatives and things like that that are entrenched around the Seattle area. And he lives like, 1,000 meters or something, he said, from the chop zone where they had Chop Chaz last summer or summer before last, whenever that was, right? So crazy powder keg situation that this poor guy finds himself living in. And he was saying that, the mental illness is just off the charts. People will be out in the streets screaming naked, and everyone just walks by and pretends to ignore it. I saw a video just before posting this. It was the New York City, I believe, subway, one of the big subways, New York City, I believe. And there were like a couple of, I'm assuming they were Asian ladies. They look like Asian ladies, and there were 3 or 4 Asian ladies on this train, on this subway, right? And there were other people around. There were a couple of normal dressed, professionally dressed black people on the train. There were, I think there was 1 or 2 white guys. There was one white guy that kind of looked like a little bit of a shady character, but he was just kind of keeping to himself, huddled in the corner. And then there was this other black guy that looked like he was wearing women's pants and some sort of a women's blouse top or something. I don't know, but it was clearly a black man. It looked like a black man anyways. And it was going, this thing was going up and down the aisle, causing problems, kicking windows. And finally, it sits down in the chair, right? I'm trying to use the proper pronoun, so I'm saying it. It sits down in the chair, in the bus seat next to these other 3 what look like Asian ladies. And they try to scoot over, and one of them tries to get up. And as soon as she tries to get up, he grabs her by the back of the hair and makes sure she can't get out of her chair. And she leans over and like quietly goes, "Help me." And she was trying to get somebody to help her. Nobody would intervene. I know from reading your comments and stuff, the audience of the Hands-On channel, the vast majority of the audience of my channel here are like me. They wouldn't be able to allow that to happen, even though we don't know that lady, from anyone else. That's not our family member, but we see a woman in distress, a damsel in distress, and none of these other guys, none of the professional black guys, none of the white guys, not even the skeevy looking white guy that was over in the corner, he didn't turn around. Nobody paid her one bit of attention. So it gives credibility to what Robert was saying in the comments, is that this is becoming the new normal. And one day, we're going to reach a critical mass, and all of this stuff's going to, I don't know. I think it's going to come crashing down, and it's not going to be a pretty fall. So let's get into this before I go too far on a tear here. So anyways, Joe Biden on Wednesday, he signed an executive order to reform policing just one day after a teenager fatally shot 21 people at a Texas elementary school. And I mean, freaking elementary kids. My God, it's the softest target you can think of. The guy went to a gun-free zone. I don't know what Texas's laws are. I know they have constitutional carry down there. So I'm a little confused of why the teachers weren't armed up, because here's the reality, liberals. Get this through your thick head. This is the truth of it. More guns in the hands of good guys stops bad guys. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's it. If somebody in that school, even maybe you don't want to have them in every class or something, but somebody, the principal or a couple of people, should be trained in firearms and how to use them and how to defend the innocent children that they're assigned to protect. And my God, man, just unbelievable, the attack that's going on not only grade school children, but our babies that can't get formula, and babies before they're even born, while they're still in the womb. Of course, they call them fetuses because that makes it easier for them to commit mass murder. So Biden politicized the tragic mass shooting and used it as an excuse to attack the Second Amendment. So this is a quote from Joe Biden. "When in God's name will we do what needs to be done, if not completely stop, fundamentally change the amount of carnage that goes on in this country?" said Biden, a lifelong grifter who spent 50 years of his life in government. So he's asking you and me when we're going to do something about this. And what he means by that is when we're going to ban AR-15s and assault rifles. He's already been floating that around the past few days. So here we go. It's mass shooting season, I guess. I don't know. I'm not saying the Democrats inspired this or they told these people to do this, but it sure does seem coincidental that every time there's a freaking election coming up, there's all these mass shootings and the Democrats start going and doubling down on getting rid of our gun rights, attacking all of our constitutional rights granted to us through the Bill of Rights. So he says he's just sick and tired of it, he added. Biden attacked the Second Amendment as he delivered remarks on the Texas shooting. The Second Amendment is not absolute. This is a quote from Biden. The Second Amendment is not absolute. When it was passed, you couldn't own a cannon. There's always been limitations, said Biden. That is complete bullshit. There is no restriction on private citizens owning cannons, ever. There's never been laws. According to historians, there is not one example of a law banning private ownership of cannons. Boom, there you go. Fact check, Biden. You're wrong. You're wrong. This is the second or third time I've heard you say this about cannons, and you're just flat wrong. Last April, Joe Biden said of the Second Amendment, while he announced executive actions on gun control, no amendment is absolute. So this is the second time he said this, but this time it's specifically about the most absolute one there is. Shall not be infringed. Don't forget that. No other amendment says that. It's the Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed. It's very important. The founding fathers were brilliant. They're the only reasons that we're not already just living in a full totalitarian dictatorship. And that's what it seems like we're headed towards. So here we go. Nothing I'm about to recommend in any way impinges on the Second Amendment. No amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater and call it freedom of speech. From the beginning, you couldn't own any weapon you wanted to own, he said. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic, and it is an international embarrassment, Biden said last year. You know what's an international embarrassment, Biden? You having dementia and actually getting whatever put into power to run the United States of the... I mean, it's so idiotic. He's saying that that's an embarrassment? How about you pooping your pants by the Pope? That was pretty freaking embarrassing, if you ask me. So let's go back into this for just a second. He says you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater and call it freedom of speech. So he's trying to cite that. He didn't say it was a law, but he cited that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater mantra several times now. And what he's trying to say is freedom of speech is not absolute either, is that there are limitations to your speech. Although I don't see any of those limitations when I read the First Amendment. Do you? I mean, obviously there are limitations in that if I say something here on this channel that calls for some sort of violence or something like that, let's say I did something like that and then people acted out on that, then in that way my freedom of speech would have gotten me in trouble, but I would still have the ability to say that. So you're not freedom from consequences just because you have freedom of speech. Of course, there's consequences to your actions and to the things you say. But Joe Biden is trying to act like you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater and call it freedom of speech, he says. Well, here's the deal about that. Like over 60 years ago, the ruling that you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, the ruling that was based upon, for one, had nothing to do with someone yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. It had nothing to do with that. The judge in the case was giving that as an example of, that there are limits to free speech. Well, here's the problem with that, Joe Biden. That ruling was overturned like over 60 years ago. So even though they made that ruling like way back in the day, like early 1900s sometime, 1915, 17, something like that, they made that ruling, and the judge said that in the case, there has never been a law that says you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That would be a violation of freedom of speech. Now, there are consequences to speech, and that doesn't negate that. But the fact is that Joe Biden comes out there on stage and attacks the Second Amendment openly, saying that no amendment is absolute. Well, I got a problem with that because the Second Amendment is very absolute and it's very clear at the end of that, shall not be infringed. Another thing he said last night, it was hard for me to even listen to it. I was just like, my God, this guy is he's gone. For one, it's the fact that he's politicizing this tragedy. That alone right there should send up all kinds of red flags to you. You should be like, wait a minute, this guy doesn't even let the bodies cool down, doesn't even figure out what the investigation shows was the real motivations of this guy, this psychopath that shot up all these kids, right? It doesn't talk about his mental issues. They never talk about mental health. All of these people like Adam Lanza and all of these other shooters that have shot up schools, You can just see it in their pictures. That I'm not talking about mugshots. I'm talking about like regular family pictures. You can see they got the crazy eyes. This guy probably had the crazy eyes too. He was probably on, that my guess would be, he's probably on psychotropic drugs or got off of the drugs that he's supposed to be on. Something made this guy snap. He killed his own grandma. I mean, if you're willing to kill your own grandma, you'll kill anybody. So that guy was obviously a danger to society and to himself. Now, should there be some sort of restriction for someone like that is batshit crazy not to be able to own firearms? Yeah, there should be. And we have to go back to what I was talking about earlier. We have a real problem here in this country addressing and dealing with mental illness. Used to be we actually had like nut houses and crazy houses, whatever you want to call them, where people would be separated from society. Now, they weren't always good. They weren't always right. They did a lot of nasty things to people and stuff like that. But I'm sure with the right kind of institutions set up, we could have a place to put these people that really don't belong in prison, because typically what's happening now is they finally do enough bad stuff that they end up going to prison, and then they're just a crazy person in prison. They never get reformed. You know, it's not about reforming these people. It's about having a place to store these crazies. And so that's what we've got going on. We've got a society where, I don't know, from my day-to-day dealings with people, I would say that at least a good 15, maybe 20% of the population out there is just out of their mind, insane, batshit crazy. And they should probably be institutionalized, or at very least, they should be on some sort of heavy sedation so that they're not a threat and a danger to society. But what is Joe Biden trying to do? Go after guns. He actually had the nerve to say, oh, deer don't wear Kevlar out in the woods. The Second Amendment has absolutely zero to do with hunting. It doesn't mention hunting not one time in there. So whatever the hell he's talking about, deer wearing Kevlar, that's some sort of weird fantasy that he's probably got going on in his feeble mind. I don't know where that's coming from, but he said that multiple times as well. So I've just fact-checked several things that Biden said here. Let me know down in the comments, what are you thinking? I mean, does this surprise you, for one thing? I mean, when it happens again, and we know it will, when it happens again, will Joe Biden say the same sort of thing? I mean, will all the Democrats, this is their mantra. Anytime there's a shooting, they blame the inanimate object instead of the person that should take the blame. And that's why things aren't getting fixed here in our country. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on the Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed. Pretty absolute where I come from. Appreciate you tuning in. I stand for liberty. I hope you do too.